Okay. Well, I want to deal with that, and Sig and I exchanged emails and had a call on or a telephone call, and this is on both our hearts. One of the things I want to share with everybody, Doug, because I'm getting emails to address Brexit, the British exit from the EU. The first domino has fallen, and fear now is spreading across the world. And what's interesting is this: as times get tougher, tough people take from weak people. I've watched it. I've observed it. I've talked to bikers. I've talked to gang leaders. I've been on talk radio 25 years, so I'm talking not immediately, but over that time period. And basically even had someone tell me, because I was in the prep business, hey, we know where you live, and when things get tough, we're coming after you. And I said, good luck, guys. 1,800 yards, you're mine. Now, I wasn't trying to make a threat, but what I was trying to point out is that the survival of the fittest is already being planned out. And one of the things I want to share with people today, because my email box filled up, and see, I was up really late last night and really early this morning wanting to see how bad this would be. Today was Black Friday, everyone. It remains to be seen what will happen on Monday. But I want to share something with everybody. Everybody who's listening to this show, you're taking for granted that you might be able to buy a firearm, that you might be able to buy ammunition, that you might be able to buy food. And let me just tell everybody, get real. I've been at this prep business, survival business, whatever you want to call it, self-reliance for a quarter of a century. And the thing that's, 35 years, so I'm 65, so more now than half my life. And been on talk radio for 25 years. And one of the things that people still don't get is the fact that when this gets bad, they will have to have their food. I've been talking to people about getting food, talking to the different suppliers. If 1,000 people, let me share how really insignificant the amount of available food is. If 1,000 people went to buy long-term storage food, okay, from whoever, they don't realize there's less than probably a dozen manufacturers, and it would sell out in the day or within the 24 hours that the phones were able to keep up with the orders. 1,000 people. Now, we're up to 300 plus million people in this country. It applies to everything. And so what I want to share with people today is this, that you've got to stay alive. The same thing applies to firearms and ammunition. Now, there's plenty of AR-15 platforms out there at this point, but in a panic, here's a good word. Panics change everything, and panics change everyone. Now, it's really critical you get that. Panics change everything, and panics change everyone. Now, Sig, will obviously train in any gunfight or any potential gunfight or any potential life-threatening situation. The last thing you want to do is panic or just react. You want to absolutely know everything ahead of time. You see it in your mind, and you fall back on your training. Well, again, what I'm sharing with people, Doug, tonight, because, look, I don't know what's going to happen Monday. I post an alert. Please, everyone, go to the alert on stevequayle.com. It's not that I'm just saying I'm trying to promote my website. I had the most disturbing call with a military, ex-military, who's in contact with current military about the plans, the coming plans that can be integrated at any moment, any time. It's not everything that people don't already, let's say, consider, and people who listen to talk radio don't already have a handle for. But here's the deal. You are going to be controlled by food. So I want you to know this. I don't know what Monday brings, but I would encourage you to go on my website, to go on the Numana food, because it's non-GMO food. It's absolutely, in my opinion, the best bang for the buck. But you've got to understand that you're locking in today's food prices against tomorrow's price rises. whatever. And you can call Ryan at 406-581-0182. And Doug, I don't care if people think this is an infomercial. How long have we pled with people to get prepared? And Sig, I'll tell you something that was astonishing. I went to an indoor range the other day in another town a couple days ago, and I was talking to a gentleman, and he told me one of his best friends works at, I believe, one of the military bases in Utah. He said that every single week, the truckloads of 22 long rifle comes into that military base, and they put it in the popper. What the popper is a place that burns it all up. Now, I asked this guy, I said, give me a little bit of your bona fides. Well, when you're starting to talk to guys who are advanced physicists and develop the railgun, and he's rattling off the rate of fire of all the SMG submachine guns and telling you how he designed this one for this one, and by the way, he's an older gentleman, I got the feeling that he knew what he was talking about. So at some point, you're already seeing it in California, your opportunity to buy a firearm, to train with that firearm, and to become proficient with it, and to have access to the accessibility of the ammunition simply is going to dry up. We've seen it before. But what's different about today, and I'm going to turn it right over to Sig, what's different about today is today a domino fell, putting into effect mass panic. Now listen, this was orchestrated by the elite. They were positioned all night long in London, buying and selling, making hundreds of billions of dollars. They want a stampede. And Al, thank you for sending that. They don't want just a general herd moving situation. They want to stampede the people. They want it chaos, because remember this, everyone, that their theme, their, if you will, immoral imperative, their prime directive is order out of chaos. The chaos that's coming, I fail to be able to define it accurately. But today, this morning, the gentleman's information to me was simply this: tell everybody to go to the movie America, spelled with a K, what is it, 20 years or some time ago, maybe even later than that, and watch, he said this, the Senate and Congress, what happened to them. Now, I'll give you a heads up. Go look at it on YouTube, but the bottom line is that the elite intend to take out all political resistance to their plan. Now, that's what they predispose, or that's what they're predisposed to, but it's ultimately God that will control that. So I'm telling everybody, okay, today, you had better take this situation, Brexit, for real. In essence, Sig, that was the end of NATO, and most people still don't get it, because Germany went to NATO last week and said, back off Russia. That's a smart thing to do, to back away and back off Russia. So when you hear anybody saying the Russians are our enemy, we need to attack and blah, 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 that is nothing but the mouthpiece of the New World Order. And even President Putin, and thank God he said to Donald Trump, whether you love Trump, hate Trump, if you would look at who Trump is hated by, it maybe gives you a greater appreciation of if God raises him up, so be it. I got 75 emails today, or actually in the last 24 hours, from people trying to decide if Donald Trump is really a Christian. And the bottom line is, listen, God changes nations through kings, and he uses kings that don't even know him at the point. Cyrus is a good example, King Cyrus. So the point is that we're in a very difficult position. And then today, and this I'll turn it right over to you, Sig. Today, a gentleman came in my store, 68 years old. He said his two neighbors he hadn't watched them. They were both pretty crippled, and obviously they were elderly in their 80s. And finally, he went over to see, or his brother went over to see, and they were both laying on the floor. They could not get up, both of them, and one of them had a broken hip. He said, Steve, if it hadn't gone over there, they would have both died. So, Sig, let's talk about now the need to protect the elderly, the need to honor the elderly, and that people who are in that mode can also not be victims. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, we're well acquainted with the problem that gun-free zones create. We've done this in our schools and other places, and we've seen that these mass murderers love these areas where they know no one's going to fight back. But we have mobile gun-free zones often happening in the form of our elderly and in people with various types of disabilities. And it is not being publicized, at least not very much, but the attacks on elderly and on handicapped people are substantially rising, and it's no wonder because they're easy prey, and they're being both assaulted and robbed, as well as being intimidated for all sorts of payoffs and other kinds of problems as well. And, you know, where the Bible tells us to look out for the widows and orphans, that is a serious injunction as well. Those that are least able to take care of themselves, we have a special ability to aid. And I get very frustrated. We have special classes for people with disabilities, and the laws are such that it severely restricts what some of these people can own, not in the sense that they can't own a gun, but, for example, some of these people cannot handle a gun safely with one hand. So an ideal situation would be a pistol with a fore-end stock to it, which can easily be purchased and bolted into place. And so it's just a handle that goes on the front part of the gun so that they're able to hold the gun with two hands. Unfortunately, as soon as you add that little innocuous handle to it, you've committed a felony, and the ATF will be happy to come and arrest you. Now, there are ways to get a special license. It's actually a tax stamp to be able to do that. But my point is we've made it more and more difficult, not just for the ordinary person to protect themselves, but also for those that are least able to take care of themselves. And so I just challenge all of us, myself included, to go out of our way, not to just befriend and help people in their hour of need today, but to be able to look out for them in the future as well. It's not enough just to think, oh, that nice old man from church, I'll go check on him every once in a while. If the situation really goes south and we have lots of violence, much better to go get him and bring him to your house and care for him there. That's what Jesus would have us do, is take care of these people. But just because someone is infirm does not mean very often that they can't take care of themselves. So in some of these classes, now I personally advocate a handgun of 9mm or larger caliber. I found just by personal experience that you need a gun of that caliber or greater to adequately engage in self-defense. But some of these people can't operate a gun very well of that size, and so their best alternative is a 22 or 22 Magnum. And we have to go to the place where they are and help them with it. And I just challenge those who are already familiar with guns to go out of their way to help those that are either older or have some kind of disability and need assistance to learn how to use a gun, and then help them get a gun or whatever it is they need to protect themselves at home. They value their independence, and we need to honor that. But one of the ways that they can stay independent and feel more secure is to have competency with, in most cases, a handgun. I'd like to, if I could, talk a little bit more about other types of non-lethal weapons that people are talking about all the time. If you are one that is not ready to buy a gun, and I'm sorry if that's the case, but if it is the case and you want something, your best alternative is probably to buy a canister of pepper spray. And unfortunately, the kind that's sold in a sporting goods store is not adequate. You need to probably go online and Google police supply store or something like that and buy the kind of pepper spray that police officers carry. And on the label, you will see it labeled as having 10% oleoresin capsicum or 10% OC. That is the best dosage of pepper spray, the most effective. Now, you can buy more. You can buy 50%, and that's great if you're dealing with grizzly bears, but it actually doesn't work that well against humans. So 10% is best, but the stuff you buy in most sporting goods stores is usually 3 to 4%. It's just not strong enough. And the police supply houses are generally where you're going to get the best price anyway. The other devices like stun guns are essentially pretty ineffective because as soon as the bad guy breaks contact, they're going to lose the effectiveness, and you will have just made them mad. And same thing with tasers, which are very expensive, and you only have one shot or two shots, and if you miss, you've made them mad as well. So these other devices just are not adequate. Let me tell you briefly a little story. When I was a uniformed officer, I responded to the scene of a domestic violence call, and the husband had already left the scene, but he'd assaulted his wife, and I arrived, and I'm in the living room taking a report from her, and all of a sudden, bam, this guy blasts through the front door, and he's 6'6", 280 pounds, and comes in and goes, "What's going on here?" And I knew I was in trouble, and I pulled out that pepper spray, and he came at me, and I sprayed him in the face with that steady stream as he came at me from about 15 feet away. And he walked right up in front of me, rubbed his hand over his eyes, and goes, "What are you doing to me, boy?" It affected him zero, not at all. But me, my tears, my eyes are running, my eyes have almost sealed shut, and I was the one dispensing it. So it is an allergen, and different people are affected in different ways. Fortunately, in that case, he had calmed down by the spraying action, even though it didn't affect him. But my point is, you cannot depend on these other devices to actually stop a serious assailant. And if you do ever use any of these devices, and say a woman's in a parking lot and she's being stalked, and a guy comes and is about to attack her, and she sprays him with pepper spray, and the guy runs off, make sure you call the police and report the attack. Because if that guy turns around and he calls the police, and he said, "This nutsy lady in the parking lot sprayed me with pepper spray, I'm a victim here, I've been assaulted," you've just opened yourself up to a major lawsuit, as well as perhaps being arrested for assault. And, these bad people don't just take advantage of people by violence, they also take advantage of people through the courts. And we need to protect ourselves both ways. And back to the point on stopping an assailant by shooting in the arm or leg, the issue with shooting someone is not to kill them. The issue is to stop the violent act. So the best way to do that is center mass, the center of the chest, and you keep shooting until the violent act has stopped. And I was reviewing some tapes today of a robbery in progress, and that assailant kept fighting back till he received the 8th shot in the chest. So if you think you're going to fire once and stop and then reevaluate the situation, it doesn't work that way. You have to keep shooting until the violent act has stopped. So again, it's not trying to kill the guy, it's to stop the violent act. And that's what's morally acceptable and specified in the Bible. It's not trying to provide revenge, it's not retaliation, it's not punishment. It is simply to stop the violent act. And once it's stopped, then you stop shooting. But you don't stop shooting until that's the case.
You know, the other thing I think is important for everyone to get tactically aware. For instance, ladies going to the supermarket. I am now, because of all of the immigrants, that are in this country, recommending that no woman goes alone to a supermarket in areas that are heavily influenced by refugees. Find a new place to go and do not go at night and go with someone else. It never hurts. Listen, say you know this as a law enforcement officer, they have a reason for two policemen being in the same car. One always keeps his eyes surveilling to the left, or in front of him right, but surveillance and situational awareness are a big deal. Number two, don't get in your car without glancing under the car. I was in Dallas pretty much 10 years ago during the holiday season, and what was happening at one of the most famous shopping malls is people were hanging out under the cars. They'd crawl under it, and then they cut the legs, cut the legs or the Achilles tendon, and would basically steal the car with all the presents and leave the person there bleeding. Now, that didn't happen every day, but it was a potential. And also, one of the things that's really, really becoming more problematic is, look, if you drive, you can get a remote starter for your car, and it won't open the door until you press the button to open the door. But remote starting, especially when you become tactically aware, and if a woman's packing, obviously she can pack it on her clothing, but and the way most women carry their purses, or at least I've observed, I used to sell women's purses for handguns when I was in the firearms business. They can walk with their hand inside the side pocket gripping their pistol. But again, here's the thing. It's only going to get worse, and that's what I think. And by the way, I can tell you this. Have you ever been back sprayed with wasp and hornet spray? I've been sprayed with, oleo capsicum 10%, and that's mean. Getting sprayed, even with the wind blowing, the hornets, I obviously wasn't spraying into the wind, but the wind came up. That stuff is debilitating because, in essence, it's an organophosphate poisoning. So a can of wasp spray, is very important. The other thing, don't answer the front door. Never answer the front door. If somebody's knocking on your door at 9 o'clock, and Doug, I told you, I have, obviously surveillance in my house, and I was downstairs doing a show with you a couple weeks ago, and somebody's at the door. Well, the deal is I think, I don't know what happened, but I left whoever talking, and I ran up there with pistol in hand because I'm serious, and the only one upstairs was my wife. So I entered the situation, and it was just some guy selling, some kind of cleaner, but he had his friend in the van down the street, and I could see, that there was somebody else out there. That was a perfect setup. Needless to say, how do I say this? Even at times you don't think it can happen, it can happen. So, Sig, I think it's critical that the argument is made, well, I just want to shoot and wound them. No, it's always stop. You stop the aggressor. You stop it. And I think that what people need to understand is that violence can overtake you anytime, any place, anywhere, and that's the place of prayer. Lead us not into temptation and deliver us from the evil. So that's how you start out the day, and that's why I pray for people on the radio. I always pray that people will be at the right place at the right time and never the wrong place at the wrong time. Because, again, I had a brother, Sig, I think, Doug, you know this. My only brother was murdered decades ago. They never found his body. The wife of the murderer came forward to turn state's evidence. Basically, the guy shot her, Sig, 4 times. She didn't die. She refused to testify at that point. Fast forward 25 or 30 years, he shoots her 4 times in the head, she doesn't die, and then turns the gun on himself. Pretty unusual case. So whenever you're subject to someone you love being murdered, you don't have much appreciation for the individuals that can kill a person in cold blood. Psychopaths and narcissistic revenge seekers, they're some of the worst people. And you've encountered that too, have you not? Where you've underestimated, or would you not say that the danger of us underestimating a potential opponent gets a lot of people hurt and a lot of people dead?
Oh, absolutely. And also, we hear a lot about profiling, and we have a tendency to profile ourselves. And when I was a police officer, I actually conducted my own little experiment with a couple other officers unofficially. And we drove down the street and picked out people that we considered that were criminals, and pulled over, talked to them, and got their cooperation. And in more than 9 times out of 10, we were correct in identifying who was a criminal. Now, the unfortunate thing is there's a lot of people out there that don't look like a criminal, whether it be a nice-looking young lady or whether it be a middle-aged man or some high school student who seems like a nice-looking kid. You just don't know who the attacker is anymore, especially when we're talking in a drug-infested environment where a lot of people are just completely whacked out on drugs of various types. But it isn't, you look through the peephole in your door and you see it's a nice-looking couple and you think it's safe to open the door. It isn't necessarily safe. Our family had a terrible situation a couple years ago where my relative listed in Craigslist that she was selling some jewelry. And, of course, that was a foolish thing to do from the beginning. And she arranged to have them come to her house, mistake number 2. But she thought it was okay because her husband was there, and he would, make sure everything was managed fine. And she looks out the peephole in the door and sees this very nice-looking couple, well-dressed, and they live in a very nice neighborhood. And so she thought that was fine. She opens the door, and immediately 2 guys that had been hiding on each side of the door rush through, push her down to the ground, grab her husband, and put him to the ground, tie him up, put him in a chair, and take all of the kids, tie them in chairs, and begins torturing one of the children, trying to get the parents to tell them not just where this jewelry was, but where's the rest of the valuables hidden in the house. And there weren't any other valuables hidden in the house, so there was nothing to tell them. And so this young kid is getting tortured. The father can't take it anymore. He lunges for the bad guy, gets killed in the process, and the bad guys flee. Well, the guy is still dead. The couple looked normal and even affluent, but the guy is still dead. And so we have to be really careful with what we're doing. Things like Craigslist, other things where we're engaging people we don't know. Of course, if you're doing something like that, a busy public place is best. But even then, you don't really know. So we have to have our guard up at all times. And we have to, what I talk about as run scenarios in our mind. What would we do? We're driving down the street, and I'm stopped at the red light, and there's a guy standing right there. What would I do if he tried to jump in the car and had a gun? Would I just drive through the red light? Would I pull my gun? Would I back up? Would I just honk the horn? What am I going to do? If we run these scenarios in our mind, we have an opportunity to be prepared when the time comes. I have a friend of mine who was a police officer off duty, and he had a habit of running scenarios like this. And one of the ones that he had run regularly was walking into a convenience store that's attached to a gas station. One day, On his way home from work, he's gassing up the car, decides he's going to go inside to get a candy bar, and walks in the door to find a robbery in progress. The guy has his gun out, pointed to the head of the cashier. There's numerous people shopping in the store that are all kind of frozen in place, and apparently he was in the process. He was going to rob all of them as well as the store. So this acquaintance of mine drops to his knee because he hasn't been seen yet and waits for the guy's attention to be distracted and the gun away from the head of the cashier, and he takes the shot. He takes the proactive shot and takes the guy out immediately. Now, he dropped to his knee so he wouldn't have to worry about secondary penetration, because if he misses, that bullet still goes somewhere. But he had worked the scenario through in his mind. He knew what he would do in a situation similar to that, and he was able to take decisive, immediate action that basically we don't know how it would have played out with saving people's lives, but they were certainly in jeopardy. And it was only because he had worked these things through in his mind that he was able to react appropriately. Now, these are the kind of things that is really our responsibility as proactive citizens to do, is figure out what we were going to do if we're confronted with various forms of evil. And there's lots of types of evil we could potentially confront. And I'm not suggesting we live in paranoia. Not at all. We are to be victorious people. We are to live with joy. We are to live with positive attitudes, not panic or fear. Fear is not of God. But one way to get rid of fear is to be adequately prepared ourselves. So we certainly depend on God. We look to Him for protection, but He expects us to do our part as well. So I just encourage all of us to run scenarios and be prepared, and don't, even when it comes to guns, the idea of gun ownership, again, is not enough. Tactical practice. Tactical is practical, as Steve pointed out. It's practical practice to make sure we're ready to respond when a situation surfaces. And, very often the news media is reporting statistics that are very misleading. But even the government statistics, if we get into the guts of them, we can discern some very interesting information. In the God Guns book, that talks about a study that was conducted by the U.S. Justice Department. And in that study, even though this was never publicized, I cannot believe it, it's a current study, said that 42% of Americans will be the victim of a completed violent crime. So that would be assault, robbery, rape, or similar violent crime in the course of their life. 42% of Americans. 83% of Americans will be the victim of an attempted or completed violent crime, and 52% will be the victim of an attempted or completed violent crime more than once. Now, granted, if you're living in a gun-free zone like Chicago, you may be the victim of violent crime, 10 times in your life, so it's going to skew these statistics. But the point is, violent crime is actually increasing. In areas where concealed handguns are allowed, the crime does decrease, but overall we are experiencing an increase in violent crime, and the projection is that we're going to have more violent crime in the future. And think of it, we have numerous ways this can happen. 1, ordinary crime. 2, terrorism and acts of war. 3, anarchy that comes about as a result from financial collapse or, pandemic or all sorts of other possible causes. And when Steve was talking about food, I would add to that ability to purify water as well. But I talked to a police officer friend of mine who I knew was not preparing, and asked him, "Why aren't you preparing?" He says, "I don't need to." I said, "You know what's coming. How can you not prepare?" He says, "I've got this." And he pats the gun on his side. I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, I know people down the street that are preppers. I'll just go get what I need." And I said, "Are you kidding me? You're a police officer and you're going to commit armed robbery?" And he just kind of shrugged. Says, "I got to take care of my family." Well, yeah, take care of your family by getting off your duff and go prepare yourself. Don't rob your neighbors. But here, my point is, this is a police officer. So our moral scruples have so decayed that, I'm not saying this is widespread and that this is what every police officer is like. That's absolutely not true. But the point is that the most trusted person in our society, should be the police officer. And here, we have a police officer talking about, well, if the situation's bad enough, I'm going to resort to committing armed robberies to take care of my family. So the culture, the civilization is now just a thin veneer, and it maintains itself just by the bare edge. And that's why, police departments, police officers are referred to as the thin blue line. And the whole idea of the thin is because it will not take much to break that thin barrier. And whether it's anarchy or just widespread crime or, the result of, one of these other circumstances, if we aren't prepared to take care of ourselves, in Jesus' injunction, his final injunction to his disciples, his followers, that night of the Last Supper is recorded for us in Luke 22:35 and 6. And he asked his disciples, he said, "I sent you out before. Did you lack anything?" And his disciples said, "No, nothing." And he said, "Well, now I send you out. I want you to bring your wallet." It says purse, but your wallet, in other words, finances. I want you to bring your bag of provisions, and I want you to bring your sword. And if you don't have a sword, sell your coat and buy one. It was that important that Jesus said, if you don't have a sword, sell your coat and buy one. Now, this is not some nicey nice kind of thing. This is the Last Supper. This is right before Jesus is arrested in the garden. And this is his final instructions he's giving his disciples. And Peter speaks up and says, "Well, Lord, we have two swords." Well, I want to point out a couple things here. One, Jesus' disciples, at least two of them, were already carrying. And the sword was the handgun of that day. But Jesus basically said that isn't enough, and they should all be carrying. In other words, it's not every person should carry a gun, but every competent, responsible person should be able to defend themselves and others. And that's what he was saying. So in other words, 2 of the 12 wasn't enough. There needed to be more. And the next part of that verse says, Jesus says, "It is enough." And if you study what that term is in that era, the term "it is enough" was really a statement, you guys aren't getting it. That's enough of this conversation. It's going to come to you later what I'm talking about. And then, it's only a couple hours later that Peter shows his volatile spirit and goes to defend Jesus and ends up cutting off the ear of one of the servants that came to arrest Jesus. Well, that to me is another reminder as well. One, Peter missed. So he was not adequately trained. He carried his sword, but he missed. And Jesus, of course, healed the ear of that servant. But Jesus at that point did not scold Peter for having a sword. He said, "Put it away, for, this is my time." So, in other words, it wasn't it telling Peter, well, you shouldn't, engage in violence. It was rather, this isn't the appropriate time for violence. And that's the other aspect of this we have to remember, too. As I mentioned before, sometimes it's better to run, sometimes it's better to hide, but the third element of being able to fight back is essential. If we leave out the third element, we are just asking to become a victim. Steve?
Doug, do you want to comment before I get into it?
No, but I think Joe might have an issue, is because some people, not an issue, but a question, because there are people who take that same scenario, the biblical scenario, and in fact, Joe
well, just what I just wanted to, what Sig said is, after the cutting of the ear and Jesus healing the ear of the soldier, he said, "Put up the sword." And then he goes on to say something. I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it right in front of me. Something along the lines of, "Put up the sword. Those who live by the sword die by the sword."
I would like to
please
share.
Yeah.
And if you could,
I would like to share this and say, I'll share and then you. I was really troubled and was praying about that. And I went and looked up the idiom, and again, and remember, ladies and gentlemen, this isn't 20th century or 21st century America. It was the Roman, if you will, conquest of the whole Middle East at that time. To live by the sword was basically what Jesus was saying. It literally means to be a mercenary, okay? And what Jesus was saying, and this came to me in an answer to prayer. I didn't go find this in a book, but he was saying, you will live by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God, but you're not going to live like the Romans do. You're going to live under the kingdom of God. He didn't tell them to sell the sword, okay? But to live by the sword, they who live by the sword die by the sword. That was a Roman idiom for being a merc, okay? A merc is a shorthand word for mercenary. And that really freed me, okay? Because the last thing I want to do is give anybody ungodly counsel. And this is the thing, okay? I tell people that they will spend more time fighting even basic common sense than they will fighting evil. It's like, and I want to just put this out. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, you don't need 75 guys chiming in on, well, he really doesn't know the Lord, he doesn't know this, he doesn't know that. And meanwhile, they're missing the whole point that look at who his enemies are. I want to share this with you. I believe, Doug, that you have to know those who labor amongst you. And Sig, you talked about the law enforcement guy that you didn't know. Years ago, when I owned a firearms store and indoor shooting range, I had two policemen, who were snickering. In those days, I was one of the guys that started the preparedness movement. I didn't start it, but I guess I took it on a national level with what I did. I mean, the pioneers started it. But they actually came in my store, and I still remember the day. I remember the thing, and they were mocking. And they said, well, by the way, we're police officers, and this is what really made me mad. We'll take your stuff, and we'll take your wife. Fast forward 25 years, I'm with a certain individual, and I have two witnesses to this, and the guy was an ex-cop, said he was a survivalist, and we're up in the mountains, and this guy has a pair of handcuffs on. His belt, duty belt, and he had his pistol. And he made the statement. I said, what in the world are those handcuffs for? He said, well, I'm of the opinion things can go south any time, and when it gets tough, I'm going to go steal a woman. I mean, he's going to kidnap a woman. And I said to him, like, you know what you are. And he said, well, what's to stop me? I got a gun. You don't. I said, brother, my hand's already on the trigger, and I did, because it just one of those things that was prompted. And there were two witnesses. So what I'm saying is this. You've got to know those who labor amongst you. You have to ask the Lord to give you men after his own heart. You have to not go by the discerning of your eyes, but by the obedience to the Holy Spirit. And if I were to tell you of the emails I've gotten in the last 48 hours over just something, and I don't know if each one of these guys has won people, Lord, they care about it or not, but they're sweating the small stuff. Know those who you're shouldering up to. Never allow, okay, anybody who's undetermined or undecided in their mind about the whole idea of self-defense. Never let them get close to you. Do not embrace a pacifist or someone that would say the statement, and I dropped my former doctor years ago, decades ago, when he said, Sig, he said, if I saw someone raping my wife, I would basically pray and I would do nothing to stop them because it must be God's will. And I went ballistic, and pun intended. When you see people like that, and this guy was a Christian, you know, he was a love everything, love everyone, and everything was fine, you know. From that day forward, we never spoke again. I won't say on the radio what I told him, but, you know, I had a brigadier general tell me if I had been the wife, you know, I would have basically shot the rapist, and I probably would have turned the weapon on my husband that was such a worm. That's paraphrasing. So the thing is that this is life and death. And, Doug, I want to make this clear. All the critics out there, everything else, you know, when the Hagman and Hagman show allowed Jeremy and Jeremiah and the crew, we raised the money. Those of you, brothers and sisters listening to this, donated to an action that took place in Iraq that was ultimately responsible and facilitating interruption through prayer. We prayed at the Whitestone Conference too, but there were men and women, brothers and sisters, who were over there ready to lay their lives down, and these were all Marine Force Recon. I mean, these were not wimps, okay? And they did something. And so when I see the casual lack of concern for men and women, boys and girls being raped, pillaged. And by the way, it's happening in Twin Falls, Idaho. Those of you who are in Twin Falls, Idaho, you should immediately circulate petitions. And for those who are on the county board or whatever, the city board, that allowed that little girl to be sexually abused by three of the Muslim, what do they call them, refugees, and the father gives the boys the high five. Those of you in Twin Falls should demand the immediate stepping down of everyone. And by the way, Sig, they just turned those kids, I think, you know, 3 kids, the oldest either 13 or 14, free on the streets, the ones that sexually molested a little 5-year-old girl. This is happening in this country now, and people better wise up and they get her speak up. Because guess what, Doug? There comes a time when we're not on the radio, and I'm sorry for getting fired up about this, and there's no, quote, embrace the devil's doctrines where everybody's going to either live or die. And I don't think being a coward, the fearful, and the unbelieving get into heaven. Look at the book of Revelation. So, Sig, do you want to comment on that?
Yes. You know, we get so busy in our lives today, and we're very often doing lots of good things. It's not necessarily we're off doing, you know, evil deeds, but we're so busy with whether it be sports or entertainment or just excessive efforts into our jobs or whatever it is that is keeping us so busy that we're failing to be responsible citizens. We have to, if we don't stand up for these victims, who is going to stand up? And who has a more responsibility to stand up than an emissary from the Lord God? So this is our job, to be active in our communities, demanding justice, demanding action. And again, I want to make it very clear, I'm not talking about revenge. I'm not talking about retaliation. I'm not talking about taking things into our own hands, at least not into our own hands unless, you know, they're happening right in front of you.